So good morning. I wanted to talk this morning about craving. It's very central to the Buddhist teachings, and it's everywhere in our lives. I mean, our survival literally depends on craving. Um, and every living being has the desire to live, and craving is really what keeps us alive. If you think about it, craving for food, craving for nourishment, shelter, safety, procreation, on and on. But it's a tricky thing because it can also tip into causing us great suffering. And even painful feelings can give rise to craving. When a painful feeling arises, we crave to be free of it. So craving can be either for something pleasant, or it can be to avoid something painful. Um, the Pali word for craving is tanha, Tanha, which interestingly translates into thirst. So the Buddha sort of characterized craving as this persistent thirst, and he identified three distinct kinds of craving, sort of categories that we repeatedly experience. So I want to briefly go through those and then talk about using our practice to manage craving so it doesn't tip into unskillful, it doesn't tip into causing us great suffering. And most of our cravings are unnoticed. They arise sort of without our conscious awareness, then they quickly are preempted by another one, and then another one, and so on. But it's just a constant sort of process within us. The first of the three that the Buddha identified, the first of the three categories of craving, were had to do with the sense desires. Craving for certain food and food taste, again, keeps us alive. Sounds, for pleasant sounds, or for silence, for no sound craving. Craving for touch, affection, physical comfort, sexual release, and so forth. So physical touch and physical comfort. And you see that each of these go through the sixth sense, the five senses, and then the Buddha always adds the sixth sense of thought. The next one is craving for beautiful comfort, comforting, pleasant sights. Then pleasant smells. We crave for those. That's why the perfume business makes millions of dollars. Um, Craving, and then finally craving for thoughts that are confirming, useful, stimulating, reassuring, and so forth. So, just think about how many sense desires in this category we have in any given moment. I can be listening to a beautiful song on the stereo. I can be tasting something really delicious. I can be enjoying the temperature in the room. I can get a hug from a loved one. I mean, it's just a constant source of motivation and driving our behavior. And in any different moment, we may have multiple cravings, but they are all adaptive, they're all skillful, and they're all based on survival and our comfort, unless they become excessive, unless they consume us and become preoccupying. So that's the category of sensual craving, sensual desire, the first of the categories that the Buddha, again in his brilliance, identified. The second type is a little more subtle, and it has to do with the ego's desire for existence and for aspiring to be what we are not. Okay, so we may want to be more wealthy, more athletic, more sexually desirable, a better musician, a better person, whatever. This craving to become, as he described it, it's often wholesome, it's often skillful. We want to be a good parent, we want to be a good friend, we want to be a generous person, we want to be a healthy person, more disciplined, and so forth. But it can tip into suffering if we set really high standards for what we want to be, what we want to become, and then not meet them. Okay, so I could say, I want to be brilliant athlete, and I'm not, and then I can suffer when I find myself lacking, or if I engage in self-criticism about my inability to do that. The other problem with this ego craving um, is that it can really get out of hand. Okay, so I want to be the richest person, so it can result in greed, one of the three poisons. It can result in uncontrolled wanting, envy. I want to be better than you. I don't like that you're better than me. Impatience, self-judgment, all kinds of temptations, all kinds of unskillful words and actions. So this is one we really have to pay attention to in our practice. And it's one of the most common forms of suffering in our modern culture, if you think about it. I mean, all the things that people want, me, more, 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 accumulating, acquiring, and so forth. So what might be healthy goals can tip into obsession and compulsion if we don't pay attention, if we don't monitor them, if we don't use self-control, impulse control. And in the extreme, this kind of craving to be other than we are, results in people committing violent crimes for money, for relationships, for things things they can't have. The thing about, I want this and I can't afford it, so I will steal to get it. So this craving to become whatever we're not is a tricky one, because on the one hand it can motivate us to do better, to be good parents, to be good friends, be good people. But if we're not aware of it, it can tip into unskillful, problematic behavior, which causes either ourselves or others tremendous suffering. The third type, which is often not acknowledged that the Buddha taught, is when we're so disillusioned with something in our life, we crave to be rid of it. Okay. He talked about it in terms of it, we want something in our lives or some experience to cease with such intensity that in that moment or on an extended basis, we crave non-existence. Okay, so for instance, if we become overwhelmed by depression, by chronic pain, by difficult emotion, we develop an aversion to life itself. Okay, if we have such antipathy toward how we look, with our aging, with any kind of disease that seems unbearable, we just crave to be rid of it. Okay, our nervous system is overcome by this energy generated by this craving to be rid of it. And in a lot of ways we deal with this is with um, doing things which try to remove that painfulness. Okay, and it's as if our whole being is rejecting our very existence. Okay, and this type of craving sometimes is characterized as being for annihilation. Now, in milder forms, it's part of everyday life. For example, if I get up and do something really stupid and feel humiliated and embarrassed and ashamed for that moment, I just want to crawl under a rock. I just want to disappear because I feel so stupid or so humiliated or whatever. I mean, that's an experience we've all had. It's probably the thing that contributes to us much public speaking anxiety, where people are afraid, they just don't want to be there. In psychology, we call this shame avoidance. The Buddha didn't obviously use that term, but it's really trying to avoid that experience of shame, that experience of just, oh, this is so bad. I feel so awful. And it takes many forms. It can include substance abuse, compulsive behavior, social isolation, where we just want to hide from others. And and in the extreme, it can lead to suicide. I so crave not to be here, not to have this experience, not to feel this bad. The only way out is to take my own life. That's in the extreme. We are usually more aware of sense desires, the first category, than the other two, the craving to become or the craving to disappear. So it is important to identify the source, the craving that is the source of our suffering, so that we can deal with it. Okay. So those are the three categories. So with that in mind, how do we manage them? And you're going to hear some familiar themes here. With the craving for sense pleasure, our first task is to notice it and label it, okay, as a longing for sense craving. So, in other words, awareness, the thing we talk about all the time. The kind of, the craving for sense desires is always seeking to please or excite our senses. Okay, I always want to be feeding that urge, feeding that hunger, and so forth. For example, when we're eating, when we're hungry, food tastes delicious, and I crave the next bite because the first bite was so good. Perfectly skillful, perfectly fine. It's what it helps keep us alive. But we want to notice that feeling, that pleasant feeling, and then notice that I want more of it. Okay. And I was just listening to a talk about this, and from a neuroscientist, and she was giving the example of how this, in the old days when we had to walk 3 miles to find 100,000 years ago to find a date tree, to crave that date and put it in our mouth, that was fine. But when we have a whole bin full of dates, our challenge is greater because now we have to learn to put the brakes on ourselves. In those days, they didn't worry about the brakes; they worried about the next date tree 3 miles further on. So this craving evolved in our ancient ancestors to assure their survival. But now, in a world of plenty, it really, the sense desire cravings really present a challenge. If you look at the obesity epidemic, if you look at all the excessive consumption, you see how in a world of plenty, this Stone Age brain that we still carry around can really create excessive consumption and suffering. Our ancient ancestors lived in a world of scarcity and constant threat, while we live in a world of plenty and relative safety. So fast forward to now and see how these same cravings that kept us alive 100,000 years ago can really challenge us in today's world. Um, you know, we often overindulge our sense pleasures to our detriment or the detriment of those around us because it's there and we have this hardwiring to crave. Things like health issues, obesity, high blood pressure, broken relationships, depletion of natural resources is all a function of these appetites that 100,000 years ago assured our survival and now may contribute to, our suffering and our early demise. What if we are aware of this internal dialogue about craving? I want one more piece of cake. I want one more extramarital affair. I want one more drink. I want one more, you know, um, pill. I want one more whatever that'll make me happy. That's where we get into trouble. So we need to cultivate equanimity about these sense pleasures. We need to create spaciousness around our cravings, see it in the larger context, step back from seeing it as a simple stimulus response. Food, eat, food, eat. No, food, pause, check in. Am I hungry? Do I need that second piece of cake? Um, when Rebecca bought that chocolate cake the other week, I was craving a second piece, but I was able to restrain myself. But at another time, I would have had the second piece. Rebecca didn't want to take the cake home because she knew that if it was sitting around all week, she'd be craving it. If I have food in the house, junk food or whatever, it's a problem. The solution is keep it out. Okay. So, so we need to bring, equanimity, mindfulness, pausing, noticing to these cravings. That's how we manage them. That's how we manage them skillfully. The second type of craving we talked about, this desire for existence, for becoming what we are not, here we get caught up in this rat race of ambition, of attainment, of the desire to become something we're not. Okay. We get caught in that striving to become happier, wealthier, skinnier, whatever. And again, we need to see that true happiness does not come from that. Momentary happiness comes from that. If I get a shiny new toy, I'm momentarily happy, but quickly the novelty wears off. True happiness comes from cultivating equanimity, cultivating self-compassion, learning to be present in the moment, all the things that we talk about here all the time. We can direct that into ways of becoming a better person, becoming a better citizen, becoming a better friend, becoming a better parent, whatever. That's the way we direct this desire to become what we're not, or to channel our aspirations. Okay, this this is what this desire is becoming what we're not in the moment right now. So our challenge is to let go of that craving to be other than I am, to become something that I'm not, to accept myself as I am, to accept things as they are, not as we wish them to be. Okay, we talk about this all the time. To understand that fulfilling this craving leads to short-term happiness, but not lasting happiness. Okay. And then the third type of craving is the desire to get rid of things. I want to get rid of my suffering. I want to get rid of my headaches. I want to get rid of my anger. I want to get rid of my jealousy, my fear, my anxiety, my worry. Okay. And this can quickly turn into I hate myself because I have this anxiety, this worry, this whatever this I'm trying to get rid of. So here the approach is different. Okay. We're not taking a stand to get rid of things, nor are we encouraging that desire. We want to reflect on this. It's like this. This is what it feels like to want to get rid of something, to conquer my anger, to kill the devil, to get rid of my greed. Then I will become a better person. Okay. We can see from this train of thought, becoming and getting rid of are associated. But when dealing with this type of craving, the key is accepting things as they are. And this is hard because we don't like to accept the parts of ourselves that we don't like. But if we're constantly fighting with it, constantly in a wrestling match with it, we are going to suffer. Okay. So we learn to lean into that which we want to get rid of. We recognize that trying to push away, avoid, only strengthens the very thing we're trying to avoid. You often hear me say that if we're in a tug of war, we're pulling on the rope against the thing we want to get rid of, the best strategy is drop the rope. Don't keep pulling and tugging. That is what causes our suffering. So, all three types of craving show how subtle they can be, but how much suffering they can cause us if we don't manage them. And I will just finish by saying we do not need to continue to suffer. We're not hopeless, passive victims of desire. Okay. We can allow it to be the way it is, and we can begin to accept it and let go. Because desire has power over us and deludes us only as long as we grasp it, believe it, or react to it. Okay. And as the Buddha taught, our freedom comes with letting go of the constant craving. It's letting go. So enough for me. Let's talk about some craving.